All right, and we're back. So in the last video, we got set up with GitHub. We installed Git on our computer. We created a starter project. The very next thing we're going to do is create the first screen. So one of the goals with these videos is to teach you how I work as an iOS developer and create a project based on the methodologies that I use every day. So one of those things is using a Kanban board or some kind of ticketing system. So I created a bunch of stories that we're going to be working off of. So this is what a Kanban board would look like. And if you want to learn more about Kanban, feel free to look that up. It would be really useful if you do want to do this professionally, because a lot of companies will use an agile or agile-like system. And what this means is we have a bunch of columns, and these columns represent a workflow. So the backlog is where tickets usually start, and then as you complete or work on these stories, then you would move it across these columns. So our first story that we would be working on is this one, and it's going to have requirements on what each story needs to accomplish. And then as part of my team, there are a lot of different types of folks on my team. So we have the iOS developers, but we work really closely with product owners, which write these requirements. And we work closely with QA, which tests the requirements after they're done. So I would work on this part, and then I would test myself to make sure that I've done everything correctly, but they would also test. And even the product owners at the very end would go through something called UAT, and they would do the final testing before a ticket would be called done. For this set of videos in this playlist, it's just us. We're going to be doing everything, but I still want to take you through this journey so you kind of see how these things would work. If this were at my job, I would assign the story to myself, and then I would move it into the next column. Here, I'm seeing that this story needs design, and just taking a look at the requirements, we've already set up the Project Connects code. We've configured all the project settings, the app name, whatever. The only thing we didn't do is the icon. So that's what we're going to be working on next. And we have run and made sure that the starter project will run successfully. Don't skip over this step, because sometimes it could be that you don't have the right simulators installed, or something else might be wrong with just your Xcode configuration. So before you go down the rabbit hole of coding too much, I would definitely try to run it and see if the starter project works. And that's the acceptance criteria, is to do all these things and just make sure that it still runs successfully. Cool. So I will move this over to design. Usually for design, I would use Canva, because in the newer Xcode versions, you only need one kind of app icon. So I'm going to delete this to show you. You only need a 1024 by 1024. But if you do want this to run on multiple systems, if you're thinking, hey, I'm going to do this on iOS, I'm going to do this on Android and web too, there's this Icon Kitchen website that I used to create the icons. So go ahead and check that out. It's pretty simple to use. But this is what it spits out, is a couple of folders with these different icons. And I'm just looking for the icon that it's 1024 by 1024. So if you look down here at the dimensions, that's what we're looking for. And because I don't have a dark or a tinted version of the icon, I'm just gonna use the same one. And now, if I run again, I should see the new icon up here and also in the simulator. So I'll go ahead and run that to show you. And then once that is done, then I'm going to move this over to code review, and I'm going to review my own code. But in a professional setting, you would have one of your peers look over the code that you write and make sure that you've fulfilled the requirements and you're not introducing anything that's going to be hard to maintain or might lead to defects down the line. There are some things that we definitely want to look at when we're code reviewing, and I could go over that more in a later video. Okay, so our Mood Tracker app is running, and we can see the new icon here. I'm going to go ahead and say that we've reviewed it, we've tested it, and this is done. Great. So the next thing we're going to look at is this mood selection UI story. That's this screen here. I did some market research before I started this video just to see what other mood tracking apps look like. And this is the one that Apple has hidden inside of the Health app. And I'm going to kind of try to use this as my design so that we have something to work off of. In a professional setting, this wouldn't be a screenshot. This would be using something called Figma or some other kind of like design tool where an iOS developer could click each of these individual components and take a look at exactly what the padding is, what the font family is, what the font size is, letter spacing, line spacing. Like, there's so much that goes into making a design look exactly how a designer intended it to look. But for the purposes of this MVP, we're going to kind of ignore that and just try to make it look as similar as possible with what we got. Okay, so we want to build a screen with a mood slider. So this is that slider here. And in the iOS app, it has 5 different moods that you can select from, ranging from very unpleasant to very pleasant. The middle is neutral. And then this little blob thing will change colors depending on what you select. And I want to have this be like a save button for now. And then later on, we'll see if we have to change that to something else. Cool. Let's get working then. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I can keep seeing the requirements as I code. I'll put that down here. All right, so this is our content view. Our content view actually starts down here. This is like where the app starts up. And what it's just doing is it's creating a window group and then just sticking our content view in there. For now, that's okay. Let's just see what we can code inside of the content view and then maybe change its name to something more specific. Okay, so we still want a VStack. And the VStack is going to have, the first thing is going to be this label here. And what we wanted to say is, how are you feeling today? Okay. The next thing is going to be the blob. We'll work on that in a minute. It looks like there's another text label. And that's going to be the mood. So for now, I guess I'll just put in mood. This is going to be some kind of like state variable eventually. And then we want a slider. And what things do we need here? We're going to need the value. And that's going to be a binding double. So let's call this mood value. And let's create it. So that's going to be private var mood value double. Good. And that's going to be at state. Great. The next thing we want to tell the slider is how many options there are. So we have 5 options. And then the very last thing we want is the step, and it will just tell it what it should step up by, and it will say 1. And if you notice on the right here, it should automatically update. So yeah, a user can select between these 5 values. I'm gonna add some padding. I like the code completion. And this actually won't work until it's in a nav view, which we're gonna do later. Let's make this a little bit more, maybe 40. That looks a little bit better. Alright, so we have the slider. Under the slider, we do have some labels here. We'll make that look a little bit better later. And then we want the save button. So let's go ahead and create a button with a title and an action. The title is going to be save, and then we'll add a to-do to actually save. And let's configure this a little bit more so that it has a capsule shape and has some kind of fill value. So this is actually going to look better a different way. So right, and then this is kind of looking really squished together. And the way we're gonna spread these things out is by adding spacers between them. So I'm going to go ahead and add some spacers, which will take up all the available space between each of these guys. We still need the blob. So let's create a blob view right after this. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is create a blob. And that's going to be just a circle for now. Let's use this blob view down here. Great. All right, cool. A little bit better. It's starting to look a little bit closer to what we need. And let's try to match up the moods here. So to match up the moods, I think what I want to do is create an enum, and that enum is going to capture what mood matches to which string that should be showing up here. So that's what that's going to look like. So I'm going to say enum mood. I don't need it to be codable, but I do want it to have a raw value of string. So we're going to have a case of very unpleasant. Love it. So that's going to be very unpleasant. This looks like it all matches up. The next thing I want to do is add a new property to this mood enum that's going to change the color of this blob. So the next thing that we want is to code back this mood value to an actual mood. So I'm going to add this selected mood property. Great. So now I want to use the selected mood value to actually change this label here and as well as the color of the circle or blob or whatever. So we want a new property here that's going to be a color. Oops. Color. And then instead of saying color.red, we're going to use the color here. And then we can map that inside of the blob view. We're going to say selected mood dot color. And we'll wait for this to update and give it a test. Awesome. All right. That looks pretty good to me. And if you notice, I will code a little bit and just test what I'm seeing. You always want to do that because you don't want to go really far down the rabbit hole and then realize that you broke something really early on that is going to mess you up in the future. Um, so I highly suggest like coding a little bit, testing, making sure that everything works before you keep going and code a huge screen and then realize that some things broke really early on that really affected everything else. Now, the next thing I want to do is change this guy here. So what we wanted to say is selected mood dot raw value, which should be the title. Nice. Great. Uh, this is looking pretty good. Let's take a look at our requirements again, make sure we're on the right track. So we built a screen with a mood slider. We have the heading, we have the slider, we have a save button. Users can see a slider and slide 1 of 5 moods. The selected mood is visually highlighted in the blob. Yeah, great. This looks pretty good. I'm gonna call this video done, and we'll catch you next time to actually do some saving and coding a little bit more.